Road trips are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be about freedom. Long stretches of highway. New places. Good memories. But sometimes, being hundreds of miles away from home can turn a normal trip into something you'll never forget. The stories in this video come from people who experience something terrifying while traveling on the road. And according to them, every detail is true. Our first story comes from a college student named Ethan. Back when I was 21, I decided to drive from Ohio to Texas during summer break. The trip was supposed to take about 20 hours. I wasn't in a hurry. I had saved some money, loaded up my car with snacks, downloaded music, and planned to enjoy the drive. The first day went exactly as expected. The weather was clear. Traffic was light. Everything felt normal. By the time the sun started setting, I had already driven for nearly 10 hours. I was exhausted. My eyes felt heavy, and I knew I needed to stop somewhere for the night. Unfortunately, I was driving through a pretty isolated area of Oklahoma. There weren't many towns. There weren't many hotels either. Just miles of empty highway. Eventually I spotted a truck stop off the side of the road. The place looked old. There was a gas station, a small diner, and a parking lot filled with semi-trucks. A faded sign buzzed above the building. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than falling asleep behind the wheel. I pulled in and parked near the edge of the lot. The diner was still open. Inside, there were only a few people. 2 truck drivers sat at the counter drinking coffee. An older woman worked behind the register. I ordered a burger and sat alone near a window. While I was eating, I noticed a man staring at me from the opposite side of the room. At first I didn't think much of it. But every time I looked up, he was still watching. He looked to be in his late 40s. Dirty baseball cap. Long beard. Heavy jacket despite the warm weather. The moment our eyes met, he'd quickly look away. Then a few minutes later he'd be staring again. The feeling was unsettling. I finished my food quickly and paid my bill. As I walked toward the door, I noticed the man stand up too. That immediately made me uncomfortable. I stepped outside and headed for my car. The man exited the diner about 20 seconds later. I could hear his boots scraping across the pavement behind me. I unlocked my car and got inside. Instead of heading to his own vehicle, the man stopped several spaces away and simply stood there, watching. I started the engine. For a few seconds he didn't move. Then he slowly smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. I pulled away immediately. My original plan had been to sleep in the parking lot for a few hours. After that interaction, there was no chance I was staying there. I got back onto the highway. The road ahead was almost completely empty. No houses. No businesses. Nothing but darkness. About 15 minutes later, I noticed headlights appear behind me. A pickup truck. At first I didn't think anything of it. But the truck continued matching my speed exactly. If I sped up, it sped up. If I slowed down, it slowed down. The vehicle stayed behind me for nearly 10 miles. Eventually I switched lanes. The truck switched lanes. A knot formed in my stomach. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe I was just tired. Then the truck suddenly accelerated and pulled beside me. I glanced over. My heart nearly stopped. The driver was the same man from the diner. He was staring directly at me. Smiling. The exact same smile. I immediately looked forward again. My pulse was racing. There was no way this was a coincidence. The man followed me for another few miles before finally falling back behind my vehicle. I grabbed my phone and considered calling the police. The problem was I wasn't even sure where I was anymore. The highway seemed endless. Then I saw a sign indicating a small town about 12 miles ahead. I decided that was where I was going. I pressed harder on the gas. The truck remained behind me. 12 miles felt like an hour. Finally, I saw streetlights in the distance. The small town appeared ahead. As soon as I reached the first intersection, I turned into a brightly lit gas station. Several vehicles were parked outside. People were moving around. The moment I pulled in, the truck continued driving past. It didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It simply disappeared into the darkness. I sat there shaking. After calming down, I went inside and bought coffee. The cashier noticed I looked nervous and asked if I was okay. I told him what happened. The expression on his face changed immediately. He asked what the man looked like. I described him. The cashier became quiet. Then he said something that still bothers me. He told me a similar description had been reported multiple times over the years. Travelers claimed a man driving a dark pickup truck would follow them late at night. Sometimes for miles. Nobody knew exactly what he wanted. But enough people had complained that locals were familiar with the stories. I asked if anyone had ever been hurt. The cashier simply shrugged. Then he said, "Not everybody who gets followed reports what happened." I spent the rest of the night at a motel in town. The next morning, I convinced myself the whole thing wasn't as serious as it seemed. Maybe the cashier was exaggerating. Maybe the man was just strange. Years passed. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Until one day, I was browsing online forums about unusual road trip experiences. Someone posted about being followed through Oklahoma by a man in a pickup truck. The description matched perfectly. Same beard. Same cap. Same unsettling smile. Our second story comes from a man named Daniel. This happened 3 years ago while I was driving home from a business trip in Arizona. The drive back was supposed to be simple. Just 6 hours on a mostly empty highway. I left later than planned and ended up driving after dark. Normally I don't mind night driving. In fact, I usually enjoy it. There's something peaceful about being alone on the road with nothing but your headlights cutting through the darkness. At least that's how I used to feel. Around midnight, I was traveling through a remote desert area. There were no towns nearby. No gas stations. No houses. Just miles of open land. The road stretched endlessly ahead. The only other vehicles I had seen in the past 30 minutes were a few distant trucks. I was listening to a podcast when I noticed something on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a broken-down vehicle. As I got closer, I realized it was a family. A man. A woman. And what looked like a young girl. Their car was parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. The man was waving both arms, trying to get someone's attention. I slowed down instinctively. Then I remembered something my father used to tell me. Never stop for strangers on isolated roads at night. Call for help if you want. But don't stop. I drove past them. The little girl appeared to be staring directly at me as I passed. For a moment I felt guilty. What if they genuinely needed help? What if their car had broken down? I checked my mirrors. They were becoming smaller in the distance. Finally, I convinced myself to call emergency services. I pulled over about a mile ahead and dialed. I explained the situation and gave them the location. The dispatcher thanked me and said someone would be sent. That should have been the end of it. But then something strange happened. While talking to the dispatcher, I glanced into my side mirror. The family was standing behind my car. My blood instantly turned cold. I hadn't seen them walking. I hadn't seen headlights. Nothing. 1 second they were a mile away. The next, they were standing behind my vehicle. The dispatcher was still talking. As calmly as I could, I asked her to stay on the line. The family wasn't moving. They were simply standing there. Watching. The father. the mother, the little girl, all staring at my car. I locked my doors. Every single one of them. The dispatcher asked what was wrong. I explained what I was seeing. She immediately told me to leave. Now. I put the car into drive and accelerated back onto the highway. The family never moved. Not once. They remained standing there as I drove away. For the next 20 minutes, I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing followed me. Eventually I started convincing myself I'd imagined part of it. Maybe they had walked faster than I realized. Maybe the darkness had distorted distance. Maybe I was simply tired. Then I noticed another set of flashing hazard lights ahead. My stomach dropped. Another vehicle sat on the shoulder. And beside it stood the exact same family. The father. The mother. The little girl. I slammed on my brakes. This was impossible. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me. No roads connected to that stretch of highway. No vehicles had passed me. Yet there they were. The man raised one arm, slowly waving. The woman stood perfectly still. The child stared at my windshield. I immediately accelerated. As I passed them, my headlights illuminated their faces. Something looked wrong. Very wrong. They weren't blinking. None of them. Their expressions never changed. Not even slightly. They looked less like people and more like mannequins pretending to be human. I pushed my car faster. 90 miles per hour. Then 100. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to reach civilization. About 30 minutes later, I finally arrived at a small town. The first thing I did was stop at a convenience store. The cashier noticed I looked pale. I bought coffee and tried calming down. Eventually I told him what happened. The man listened quietly. Then he asked where exactly I had seen the family. I described the location. His face changed immediately. He looked uncomfortable. Almost nervous. Then he told me something I wish I had never heard. Years earlier, a family had died on that exact stretch of highway. A drunk driver crossed into oncoming traffic and hit them head-on. The parents died instantly. Their daughter died at the hospital later that night. I asked what they looked like. The cashier disappeared into a back room. A minute later he returned with an old newspaper clipping. The article showed a photograph of the family. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. It was them. The same faces. The same little girl. The same parents. The exact family I had seen. I immediately told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe I subconsciously imagined similarities. Maybe I was exhausted. But the cashier wasn't finished. He said travelers occasionally reported seeing a stranded family along that highway. Always at night. Always near the crash site. Always asking for help. Most people assumed the stories were local legends. Until one detail kept appearing. Witnesses often claimed seeing the family in multiple locations miles apart within minutes. Exactly what had happened to me. I left town shortly afterward and continued home. For months I tried forgetting the experience. Then one evening I received an email. The emergency dispatcher I had spoken with that night had followed up regarding my report. She explained that officers had searched the area after my call. They never found any stranded vehicle. No family. No hazard lights. Nothing. The highway had been completely empty. There was only one part of her message that truly disturbed me. According to dispatch records, my call lasted just over 3 minutes. But based on timestamps from my phone's GPS history, nearly 45 minutes had passed. I still can't explain that. To me, the encounter felt like maybe 10 or 15 minutes at most. Somehow, half an hour had disappeared. Gone completely. And I have no memory of where it went. Even now, whenever I drive through isolated areas at night, I think about that family. Especially the little girl. Because as I passed them the second time, just before they disappeared into the darkness behind me, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. She wasn't waving for help. She was pointing directly at my car. As if she could see someone sitting in the back seat. Someone I couldn't see. Our final story comes from a man named Marcus. Out of everything that has happened to me in my life, this is the one experience I can never explain. Even after 8 years. Even after moving to another state. Even after doing everything I could to forget it. The memory still keeps me awake some nights. It happened during a solo road trip through northern Montana. I had spent the weekend visiting friends and was driving home alone. The trip would take roughly 9 hours. Most of the drive was through isolated mountain roads. Beautiful during the day. Terrifying at night. Unfortunately, I got a late start. By the time I reached the most remote section of the highway, darkness had completely taken over. The road twisted through dense forests. Towering trees surrounded both sides. There were no houses. No gas stations. No signs of civilization. Just endless darkness. I remember checking the time. 11:43 p.m. My fuel tank was half full. My phone had no signal. And I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost 40 minutes. The silence was overwhelming. Even the radio had turned to static. That's when I noticed someone standing beside the road. I nearly jumped. 1 second the shoulder was empty. The next, a figure appeared in my headlights. A woman. She looked to be in her 20s. Dark hair. Grey hoodie. Jeans. She wasn't waving. She wasn't asking for help. She was simply standing there perfectly still. Watching the road. I slowed instinctively. As my headlights passed over her face, she turned toward me. I caught only a brief glimpse. But something about her expression bothered me. She looked terrified. Not scared. Terrified. Like she'd just escaped something horrible. I drove another 100 yards before stopping. Every instinct told me not to. But leaving someone alone on a deserted highway at midnight felt wrong. I put the car in reverse. Slowly backed up. And rolled down my passenger window. "Are you okay?" I asked. The woman hesitated. Then quietly nodded. My car broke down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I looked around. There was no vehicle anywhere. No headlights. Nothing. "Where's your car?" She pointed into the darkness behind her. Down the road. I couldn't see anything. Not even a reflection. She looked exhausted. Cold. Shaken. I felt bad for her. "There's a town about 30 minutes ahead," I said. "I can drop you there." For several seconds she didn't respond. Then she slowly opened the passenger door and climbed inside. The moment she sat down, the atmosphere changed. The temperature seemed colder. Much colder. I adjusted the heat. Nothing changed. The woman stared straight ahead. Silent. I tried making conversation. No response. I asked her name. Nothing. Just silence. The only sound was the hum of the engine. A few minutes later I glanced toward her. She was still staring forward. Completely motionless. Not blinking. Not moving. Just staring. I suddenly felt uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. I turned my attention back to the road. The next 10 minutes felt endless. Finally, I noticed lights ahead. The town. Relief washed over me. At least I'd be dropping her off soon. As we entered town, I asked where she wanted to go. Still no answer. I looked toward the passenger seat. It was empty. My heart nearly stopped. The woman was gone. Gone. The door was closed. The seatbelt hung untouched. There was nobody there. I slammed on the brakes. My pulse exploded. I searched the entire vehicle. Back seat. Floor. Everywhere. Nothing. The woman had vanished. I know how insane that sounds. But that's exactly what happened. I convinced myself exhaustion was causing hallucinations. There had to be a logical explanation. There had to be. I checked into a motel and spent the night trying to calm down. The next morning, I visited a local diner. While eating breakfast, I mentioned the experience to an older waitress. At first she laughed. Then I described the woman. Dark hair. Grey hoodie. 20s. Terrified expression. The smile disappeared from her face. Immediately. She asked where I'd picked her up. I explained. The waitress sat down across from me. Then she told me a story. About 7 years earlier, a young woman had gone missing along that stretch of highway. Her car was eventually discovered abandoned near the forest. The vehicle contained her purse, her phone, her keys, everything. But the woman was never found. No suspects. No answers. Nothing. I felt my stomach tighten. Then she pointed toward a framed newspaper article hanging on the wall. I looked up and froze. The photograph showed the missing woman. It was her. The same woman. The same face. The same grey hoodie. The exact person who had been sitting in my car. I immediately stood up. I walked closer to the article. The date showed she had disappeared years before my encounter. Years. I left the diner feeling sick. Part of me still wanted a logical explanation. Maybe I had seen her picture somewhere before. Maybe my brain connected unrelated memories. Maybe. But things became worse a month later. One evening, I was cleaning my car. While vacuuming under the passenger seat, I found something wedged beneath the rails. A small silver necklace. I had never seen it before. The chain looked old. Tarnished. At the center hung a tiny pendant shaped like a flower. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at it. The necklace bothered me. Deeply. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online archives about the missing woman. Eventually I found an old family photograph included in a news article. The woman was smiling. Standing beside her parents. And around her neck was a silver necklace. A flower-shaped pendant. The exact necklace sitting on my desk. I threw it away that night. Straight into a dumpster. I wanted nothing to do with it. The next morning, I opened my glove compartment while driving. The necklace was inside. I nearly crashed. I know what you're thinking. Maybe I accidentally kept it. Maybe I imagined throwing it away. I didn't. I remember every second of it. Terrified, I drove to a lake outside town and threw the necklace into the water. As far as I know, it's still there. At least I hope it is. Because 2 years ago, I received a message from someone who had watched me tell this story online. The message contained only one photograph. Nothing else. No text. No explanation. Just a picture. The image showed a woman standing beside a forest road at night. Dark hair. Grey hoodie. Looking directly at the camera. Around her neck hung a silver flower-shaped pendant. The same one I threw into the lake. I never replied. And I never saved the image. But sometimes I wish I had. Because every now and then, when I'm driving alone late at night, I glance at the passenger seat. And for just a split second, I think I see someone sitting there. Watching the road ahead. Waiting to be taken home. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. And remember, if you're traveling alone at night, always pay attention to who's on the road with you. Because sometimes they may not actually be there.